Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We're going to give it a couple of minutes to let some other people join. We're just waiting for just a handful more people to join, and then we're going to get going. Okay, great. It seems like most of the people that were supposed to be here have already joined. Good morning. This is Norman Ronald, Deputy Director of the Office of Illinois Works. We wanted to take an opportunity today to go over the closeout process that we are getting ready to start. The main presentation today is going to be delivered by my colleagues, Steve, Dan, and Christine. They will be going over the content, but I just wanted to give some introductory words related to this process. As you all know, we are about to start the last month of our program year. Our program year closes December 31st, 2023. And as a result of that, we need to get going with our closeout process. For those of you that have received funding in the past, you know what that entails. We need to be able to enter all the necessary information in IWRS. And then you will be having a very interactive process with the grant managers, with your grant manager, to ensure that information is not only complete but also accurate. Once we finish that process, you will receive notification about your closeout status. Our close to 10% of your funding from your grant from this grant year is tied up in the closeout process. So we want to make sure that not only do we get all the necessary information that we need for our purposes for the evaluation that we have to conduct, and also for all the reporting we have to do to the governor's office, the DCO director's office, and the General Assembly, but we also want to make sure that you have an opportunity to receive your closeout funding as a result of this process. It's very, very important that we really stay on the timeline that will be discussed later. It is our goal to finish our closeout process by the middle of January. Last year, the closeout process dragged for a very long time, and we cannot do that this year. We want to make sure that we finish it by the middle of January so that you can go on and continue your programming. We do anticipate that the rolling closeout process that we've been doing throughout the year will be helpful in helping us expedite this process. So as a result, we do want to make sure that we have a brief closeout timeline this time. One thing that is going to be important that we really ask that you make available is those individuals that work in your team in entering data in IWRS need to be available to have a back and forth process with our grant managers. They will receive the documentation that will be used for closeout. They will be asked questions, updates will be provided, and we want to make sure those individuals are available. Obviously, we keep in mind that there are holidays involved in the next few weeks, but let's try to expedite the process so that by the time the holidays come, we are pretty well into the process so that we don't have too much left. And once we come back from the holidays, we're still going to go through the closeout process for a couple more weeks. So it's important that staff is made available and that they respond as quickly as possible so that we can expedite this, not only for your program, but for the whole Illinois Works network in general. So as we go through this presentation with my colleagues, ask your questions, make your comments. We want to make sure it's an interactive webinar today so that we can all be on the same page by the time we're done. And then come tomorrow, we get going with this process until it's done. I want to thank you again for all the work that you have done this program year. We are finishing very strongly here this program year. We are looking forward to the next program year where we anticipate that there'll be a total of 37 grantees. We are adding 10 more grantees to our network come next year. So a total of 37 grantees will be operating throughout the state of Illinois, covering most of the geography of the state and also serving the underrepresented populations we are required to serve by the Illinois Works Jobs Program Act. So once again, thank you. Please take an opportunity to thank all your staff for all the work they've done in the different areas of programming that they've been involved in. And as we have always said, that your success then becomes our success. We could only be successful if your program is successful. So thanks again, and I wish you, if I don't get to talk to you again, I wish you happy holidays, and I hope you enjoy the time off. I will hand it over to the team for them to get going with the presentation.
All right. Well, good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Norman. So, of course, I'm Dan Martinez. I'm one of the grant managers with Illinois Works, and I'm going to start us off by discussing, our objectives for today. We're going to communicate to you the goals of this closeout process. We're going to identify for you each of the steps that we will go through during closeout, and talk to you about how to successfully complete and submit your closeout verification forms that you will all receive. And then, as Norman touched on, discuss how the closeout funds will be part of your grant award. So let me start by discussing that the process overall. So we are going to, Norman touched on this as well, that the closeout process is basically verifying the data in Illinois Works reporting system. And we've talked all year about how if it's not in IWRS, it didn't happen. And we know you've been your organizations have been putting a lot of hard work into your programming. There's been a lot of effort in ensuring that data entry, and so this is that confirmation of that process, so that everyone has that credit, because reporting is a pillar of the foundation for our reporting. As Norman mentioned, legislative updates, things like that. We need this information to be in the Illinois Works reporting system. So we're going to go through and make sure all of that data is verified for quality and completeness in IWRS, and then that will allow us to award the closeout funds based on that data quality. So then here's the timeline that we will be undergoing. Today, you'll receive your closeout checklists. Again, we're going to talk about the checklists in just a moment, but you'll receive your closeout checklists. Then you'll have about a week, a little more than a week, to work on those and return them to your grant manager. So December 8th, we expect those closeout checklists to be returned. Then once your grant manager receives your closeout checklists, they will begin the process, or we will begin the process of checking the participant data in IWRS for that quality and completeness that I mentioned. And this will be an interactive process where your grant manager or an Illinois Works grant manager will communicate with you any questions that they have, requests for data updates, missing data, inaccurate data, things like that. And so we're going to ask you to be very responsive to that process. As Norman again pointed out, last year, the closeout process, it took a very long time, took a lot of your time, took a lot of our time, and it delayed the processing of those closeout funds. So we hope to run under a much tighter schedule. So we ask that you are very responsive when asked for updates. And then after that, mid-January, we'll be issuing the closeout reports, and issuing to the Office of Grants Management notification of the closeout reward or a closeout award eligibility. So there is a note here that there are some grantees that are still completing programming. Typically, they're the ones that are using a semester model. And so you may have a slightly different closeout timeline, but you can talk to your individual grant manager about that. So before I move on, are there any questions about the closeout process, about the timeline, before we move into the checklist itself? Are there any questions in the chat?
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve. So now we'll talk about that closeout checklist. So as we mentioned, each grantee will be provided with a closeout checklist that asks them to verify the data based on their participants and what should be reflected in the Illinois Works reporting system. So that's going to depend on each participant's status. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but certainly somebody who is in incomplete status has a different set of requirements than someone who is complete. And so grantees are responsible for verifying all of the items in IWRS for each individual that they've entered and reporting them on the closeout form. From there, we will ask that again, I mentioned that the statuses will be different for each participant. So as it explains here, the participant who is enrolled would be expected to have all the intake data and maybe some data related to training. However, a participant that's complete and in transition would be expected to have all of the intake data, all of their training data, all of the documentation showing certifications and transitions and things like that. So, we'll ask that you keep an eye on that, and we provide a legend to help identify the items that are required. So let's take a look at the closeout checklist itself. It's divided into 3 sections. There's the intake tab, the training and services tab, and program completion tab. And so we'll look at each of those individually. The intake tab, again, and we've done this throughout the year through our rolling verification as part of compliance. As you enroll an individual, there are requirements that are needed to be entered into IWRS. Certainly, they must complete an application. You're required to upload the interview sheets that were the verification of that person's eligibility to be offered enrollment. We ask that they're obviously assigned to a cohort. We ensure that their commitment agreement is uploaded. All of these things. So these are the intake tab checklists, and so for every participant that is in an enrolled status, in a complete status, even in incomplete status, all these items would be expected to be in IWRS for each of those. Then looking at the training and services tab, these are the ensuring that all of the required modules are entered into the participant's profile, that they all have an accurate final status. So whether a person is complete or incomplete, or complete and in transition, all of the services should be in a final status. What that means is that we shouldn't see any services that say planned, not started, right? So they should say successfully completed or unsuccessfully completed. In some rare cases, a training service might even say evaluated, not required. Those typically only apply to someone who came in with their OSHA 10 already, and there are certain circumstances and procedures for allowing that. But at any rate, those 3 are all final statuses, and we'd expect to see those. Certainly, they all need to have accurate attendance and post-assessment scores. all the credentials that were earned need to be entered, and then in the upload section we need to see all their certifications, verifying that they completed the required courses. Then the wraparound services, student support services, are also expected to have final statuses. Now, these are a little bit different. In these cases, an unsuccessful completion would mean that you did not offer the wraparound service to the individual, even if they requested it. Whereas an evaluated not required means that they no longer needed it, even though you were offering it to them. But in any case, those are still final statuses. We cannot see any that are still, pending or planned, not started, that sort of thing. So each service needs to be in a final status, and then the overall goal. There are 4 goals, of course: the training, wraparound support services, student support services, and transition services. All of those goals need to be in their final status of complete as well. And then participants who completed the program should have at least 1 transition service under the transition services goal. Then we have our program completion and follow-up tab. When a individual completes the program, and you enter that completion in and create a baseline assessment for them, it then starts the clock to produce an active tracking follow-up after 90 days. So there should be at least 1 active tracking questionnaire completed for any participant who completed the pre-apprenticeship program on or before August 30th. We will check to ensure that any transition documentation is uploaded for the participants, and again, that the overall completion status is appropriate. So if a person is complete, in a complete status, but they don't have their OSHA 10 certification in the upload section, they can't be complete. They would need to be incomplete. So we'll check for that overall completion status as well. All right.
It looks, sorry, just to not to interrupt, but it looked like someone had a question they put in the chat, or they said they have a question. Just want to flag that.
Yeah, I know I've moved through that kind of fast, so I don't want to get too far into the checklist without answering that. So if you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Thank you, Dan. My name is Danielle, and I work with ILWPP program. And the question I have is when I click on the module that says plan not started due to the individual leaving the program, and when I click unsuccessful completion of that module, it shows up as a red flag. So I was wondering, how do I get rid of that red flag? Because it shows up as a red flag for attendance reasons. So do I go in and put absent, which I did, and that still shows up as a red flag? So how do I get rid of the red flag after I put that module under unsuccessful completion?
Well, so there are a couple of things that it could depend on the module type and things. So this may be a question that we need to address looking at the individual offline. But in general, let's say you have a student support service like a makeup exam. If you should not have entered in any hours per week, that should be 0 there. And as long as that is 0 and you don't enter in any attendance, then the system won't check that for an attendance failure. Really, we only expect to see and only want to see attendance on training modules. So if it's a wraparound support or student support or a transition service, we wouldn't expect to see any required attendance there. And sometimes entering attendance into those other types of modules can trigger a red flag. Did that answer your question?
Okay, so just so I'm clear, so anything that's underneath the training, that would have a red flag. If it's planned, I started, and then I changed to unsuccessful completion, that would have a red flag. But anything in training services, and I'm sorry, anything in support services and or wraparound and transition, that would not create a red flag. That's what you're saying?
It's simply by moving the status to unsuccessful completion or evaluated not required for a student support wraparound or transition service will not automatically create a red attendance red flag. Now, if a training service, if a training service should be unsuccessfully completed, then you will have a red flag because the person's incomplete. But again, these are kind of technical questions that maybe we should, discuss
Perfect. Thank you.
one-on-one.
Look forward to
But
it.
it's a good question because ultimately, you can use those red flags as guides, but you would need to look into each instance as to whether or not it should have a specific, whether that red flag is something that needs to be resolved.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I can meet with you after. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. Any other questions before I move on?
Yeah, actually, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, Joe from St. Augustine College. So for the intake process, we do the wraparound service assessment, right? And then that gets added to the student's profile. I know you touched on it, but for the incompletes, there's two statuses. For the student who has left the program, which status should we put those wraparound services as? I know you had mentioned one of them means we don't offer the service, and I don't want that to reflect on us, right? So which would you prefer?
So if a participant requested a wraparound service, let's say alumni networking, and then they left the program after 1 week, and you did not have the opportunity to provide them with alumni networking, you would mark that as evaluated not required, and you would enter the note explaining that the participant left before you could provide the service. And typically for something like that, you want to explain that their leaving did not have anything to do with not receiving that wraparound service. So, for example, if they had requested childcare and they left the program and you didn't offer them childcare yet, maybe the reason they left was because you didn't offer them childcare, and at that point it would be an unsuccessful completion, right? But if they left before you could provide that to them, or even though you offered it to them, they say, no, I have to leave for something unrelated, then that would be evaluated not required.
All right, I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
No problem. All right. So moving on, looking at the closeout checklist, the second page of the closeout checklist, we want to be sure that everyone understands, again, the overall status for the participant will determine what tasks are required. So as it's highlighted there, a person that's in administrative withdrawal, they would have completed an application in IWRS. They would have been interviewed, right? Because they were offered enrollment. And so they should have an interview score, interviewer names, and the interviewer sheets uploaded, but they wouldn't have anything else. They never actually attended your program, so they didn't come on the first day. They wouldn't have an orientation career assessment. They wouldn't have a commitment agreement or any of those things. So so your number of profiles, the number of overall participants that came through your program for you say interviewer sheets uploaded might be 50, but the number of people that you enrolled in total might only be 40. So we'd expect to see 50 different participants with uploaded interview sheets, but 10 of those maybe were administrative withdrawals. So it's important to keep this legend in mind as you go through and identify all of the participants and the necessary documents or data elements in IWRS. All right. So that was the last of closeout checklist that I had. Any questions? I know we just discussed some, but any questions on that last section about the legend? All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to Christine, and she's going to walk through some tips for the checklist.
Hi, everyone. I hope you are having a good morning so far. So like Dan just went through, this checklist is really just meant to kind of help you all verify, is this information in the system for each of your participants? So the closeout process at the end of the day is really just trying to make sure that we have accurate data in the system about all of your participants, and that you all are getting the accurate outcome metrics, and of course, funding then related to those outcome metrics. So I wanted to kind of walk through this section on how to fill out this form in kind of the most efficient way. So I know we all have a lot on our plates, so the faster that this process can go, the better, but we also want to make sure that it's accurate. So I put together, as you can see on your screen, kind of a batching system, if you will. So just taking the different tasks that are on our checklist and dividing them into 4 batches. So just as a way that you can easily access this information and kind of check it off your list as you go through. So as you can see on the screen here, I have 4 batches. So these are defined by where you're going to find the information related to each of these tasks. So the first one is the export report. So with the export report alone, just downloading that report, you can take care of 8 out of the 21 tasks on this checklist. So just that report alone will help you kind of clear those 8 tasks. The next one is just looking at your enrollment and uploads folders. We'll take care of 5 out of 21. Just the training services and active tracking will take care of 6 out of the 21 tasks. And then finally, and this is usually kind of the most time intensive, is your attendance and post assessments. We'll finish off that list. So I'm going to walk through each of these individually. I did see a question in the chat. We will be sending out this presentation, so you will have all of this information for your use. So let me go ahead and just jump into the first one here. So this is our export report. So I'm sure by this point you're all familiar with that report, but that is easily downloadable from IWRS. All of you have access to that. And you can see on your screen the fields that you should download to be able to clear these 8 tasks. So just by pulling your participant address, their interview score, assigned cohort, wraparound service assessment, first and second career assessment, all relevant earned credentials, and then your customer status. Just by pulling those, you'll be able to answer these tasks that are marked with an orange X. So if you're looking for kind of, let's say, a quick way to get started, this is where I would start, is just going through this export report. You can easily look at all of your participants and mark off these items, yes or no, if they have them. Are there any questions about this kind of first batch? Let's see, where would I find the active tracking questionnaire that needs to be filled out? So William, that is going to be, I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So if we could just hold on to your question, and I will come back to it in just a moment. Customer status, can you explain? Yeah, absolutely. So the customer status is, that's what they call it in IWRS. We usually refer to it as participant status. So that's where it's going to say if your participants enrolled, complete in transition, incomplete. That is their customer status or participant status. Any other questions?
We have a question here from Anthony Alexander. It says, if a student moves out of the state of Illinois, do we still need to put him in a ATS?
So that is a really good question. So we're not talking about ATS today specifically, but if a student is permanently moving out of the state of Illinois, I would not put him in ATS. ATS is really designed for contractors here in Illinois looking for workers. So if that person is not going to be able to work for one of those contractors, then you don't need to. But that's something that I would follow up with your grant manager on, just to see kind of the logistics of that. That is how I would go with that one. Thanks, Dan. So Dan just put the active track or the applicant tracking system WebEx in the chat for all of you. All right, so I'm going to move to the next batch here. So once you have kind of cleared those first tasks with your export report, now you can jump into enrollment and uploads. So when I'm talking about this, when I'm talking about kind of batching, is that you're going to each of your participants, but you're only looking at your enrollment and uploads. So what we know to be true is that when we batch activities, we're able to get through them a lot faster. So just by going to your participant profiles and looking at the enrollment page, your intake tab is what it's called in IWRS, and your uploads folder, you'll be quickly able to see our interview sheets there for each of the participants. Are the interviewer names entered? Do they have a signed commitment agreement uploaded? Do they have any certificates uploaded that they may be required to have? So if your participants are in a complete or complete in transition status, we would expect them to have certificates. And then is there any transition documents that should be there that are not? So again, this is just a check for kind of that data integrity. This is a quick way to see, are those uploads available? Is the interviewer information where we need it to be? Any questions on this batch? Okay, right. So the next one is your services and active tracking. So this is when you are going to start going into those training and services tab and your program completion and follow-up tab. So again, this is when you're just going to be looking at those two tabs to verify, is the information on that tab that needs to be there. So in this one, you're going to be looking at your training services, making sure that all of your training services are listed there. All of those training services have a final status listed. So was it successfully complete? Was it unsuccessfully complete? You're also going to be looking at your supportive services. So your wraparound, student support, transition services, those that are there, obviously make sure they're accurate. You want to make sure that if a service was provided, it's in the profile, but also does it have an accurate final status? So was it provided? Was it not provided? And then finally, on your program completion and follow-up tab, is there an active tracking questionnaire there? Now, William, this was back to your question about the active tracking questionnaire. That is on the program completion and follow-up tab. All the way at the bottom of that screen, you will see a blue button that says Add Active Tracking. That is where those active tracking, or sometimes it's referred to as follow-up questionnaires, that's where those exist. So as a reminder, every 3 months after someone leaves the program, completes the program, because we do not need them for those who leave prematurely, only those who complete the program. After they complete, every 3 months, they need to have an Add Active Tracking questionnaire entered into IWRS. So you'll see on the, let me grab this here, this last one, task 21, it specifically states that there needs to be an active tracking questionnaire, at least one active tracking questionnaire for every participant who graduated as of August 30th. So you will notice that date is 3 months back from today. So at this point, those individuals should have at least one active tracking in our system based on that every 3-month guidance. Are there any questions on that?
Hey, this is William.
Yeah.
I pulled up, I found where you were talking about. It looks like it asks for post-program active tracking, and then below it says select status, planning to enter DOL registered apprenticeship program, not planning. What if our participant we're on has already entered a program and working?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that questionnaire mimics your complete and transition questionnaire. So ultimately, that first question is just trying to understand, is that person still going in the vein of either a DOL registered apprenticeship program, or are they now going somewhere else? So for someone who's already enrolled, you would select planning to go into a DOL registered apprenticeship program. The system will then allow you to choose, have they applied? Are they enrolled? Are they waitlisted? And it'll give you options to then enter that information. So really that first level question is just trying to get that direction if that person's still going to a DOL registered apprenticeship program or not. And then from there, it will allow you to state what status they're in. So are they enrolled? Are they applied? Where are they at? Did that answer your question? Okay.
Everything. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, William. Any other questions? Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on now to the last batch, which is our training services. So this one, like I said, this is usually going to be probably the most time intensive because it is checking that your attendance is correct and that post assessments are correct. Now, the big reason that these are so important is because your attendance is connected to those stipend payments. And we always want to make sure that that attendance is accurately reflecting whatever was paid out to those participants to ensure in the event that there's ever some sort of monitoring or auditing, that if the auditors come into our system, which they do from time to time, that your information is accurate, they can utilize that to compare to those stipends. So this is a critical area. And again, this is when you're going to be going into those individual profiles and just making sure to compare your attendance rosters and their post assessments with what is in IWRS. But the way that this system is kind of set up with this batching, the other areas are kind of designed to move a little bit quicker so that this area you are able to kind of spend a little bit more time overall. Again, you know, you can utilize this system or not. These are just tips to try to help you get through this. But this is a way that you could navigate this, and hopefully it will help you move through this checklist a little bit quicker. So any final questions on kind of this batching suggestion?
This is William. I got one more quick question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Now, I've been keeping track of all the cohorts really, but what do we do for the ones that will not answer a phone call, return voicemail, return a text, or I've got a couple that the numbers aren't even in service anymore?
Yeah, that is a really great question.
How do we
I'm
do
sorry, I
that?
didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off there, William.
No, sorry.
I was just vehemently agreeing with you that we know we also have that when we've tried to reach out to some students, and I've heard that from other grantees. So in the event that you try to do this follow-up and it's just not working, what we ask you to do is just provide a case note. So just state, we attempted to call, number was out of service. We attempted to email, never got a response. Whatever steps kind of your transition coordinator or whatever staff member is doing that follow-up is following, please just document that. If we during our closeout process, go through and see there's not an active tracking, but there is a case note outlining we made an attempt and this person's just not responsive, that is fine. We just really want to make sure that those attempts are being made so that we can continue to see where these participants are going and be able to track their, short-term success in that 1 year and then eventually their long-term success over the succeeding 9 years that we'll be tracking them. Did that answer your question, William?
Sure did. Thank you.
Okay, awesome, great. It looks like we also have a couple more questions. So Diane is asking if a student goes through the program and decides to drop out 2 weeks before, will we be responsible to provide a stipend? So I believe you're asking if they drop out 2 weeks before they graduate, will we be responsible to provide a stipend? So you would be. So whatever kind of performance they've done in the program, whatever attendance. So obviously each of you has a slightly different policy that you work under. But if they have participated in the program, they have, gone through the program, attended, met any sort of criteria you have as far as their performance, then yes, a stipend would be required. And then Tawana is sharing, it looks like, is it because we closed out? Okay, yeah, so Tawana is just asking about the active tracking button, and it may be due to the date that you completed. So let me follow up with you after this, just to kind of look at that. That may just be an IWRS date issue. So let me follow up with you. And then Vernicier is asking if a participant is coming into the program and already has OSHA 10, how would we document it? Yeah, great question. So for OSHA 10 and first aid CPR, we do have some participants who are going to enter the program who already have that certificate. These are, obviously common certificates they may come in with. In the event that that happens, what we ask you to do is on their profile, you're going to change the status of that module to evaluated, not required. But we also need that certificate uploaded. So even though you didn't help them get that certificate, that participant will need to provide that certificate to you to show that they do have it. So just upload that as if you would upload one that they earned with your team. And then the next question is the exit interview questionnaire necessary to upload into the system for all students who left the program? We do ask, yes, if you are able to complete an exit interview questionnaire, please upload that into the system for us. Obviously, again, same thing with the follow-up. Some people who leave, you just never hear from again, but it is possible that, if you did get one, please upload it. And then how would we handle their attendance? That we have one of their certifications. You're just going to put 0. So you'll just put 0 as required hours and then 0 in their attendance. Yeah. So I'm going to, just for the sake of time, because I want to make sure that we all get out of here and respect your time. We are going to provide one additional tool for you all. Again, this is not a mandatory tool. You do not have to use this. But each of you, along with your checklist today, will also get a spreadsheet that has all of the participants in it that we are going to be looking for. So these participants are the participants who are in IWRS and their current status as of this morning at 8:30. So you will each get this spreadsheet today along with your checklist, so you know what participants we have in IWRS and what status they're showing. And then you're able don't have to turn this in. It's not required to utilize it, but it may help you to track as you go through. And each of these spreadsheets also has an equation on it that will automatically count your yeses for you. So you saw on that checklist, there is a column where we ask how many people have an application, how many people have an interview sheet. You can use this counter at the bottom of that spreadsheet for that total number on your checklist. So again, just a tool that you can utilize, not required, but something that we are going to provide to you. So please look out for that. And then just as kind of a final closeout of this, it is possible that during this process, you're going to submit your checklist back to us. And we will come back to you with questions or say, hey, you said this was uploaded, but we're not seeing it. Or I see the interview sheets, but the third page of this person's interview sheet's not there, whatever that might be. So please just look out for those emails. As Norman mentioned, there will be a little bit of a back and forth with us, but hopefully it will be pretty quick. The more accurate this initial checklist is, the more accurate that we can, or the more quickly we can move through this process together. So, are there any questions before I hand it off to Steve, who's going to do our last section talking about funding, which I know we all, that was always my favorite part to talk about when I worked with nonprofits.
There's a couple of questions
Yeah.
in the chat. One is from Henry Wright. He writes, for incomplete or withdrawn participants after clearing up attendance, red flags won't clear up. Can you let me know what steps is needed to clear them out of the system?
Yeah, absolutely. So this seems similar to one of the other questions we had earlier. So maybe it would be helpful along with your checklists. I'm going to send everyone some of our tutorials on this item specifically and some other helpful items. We have some video tutorials, but also, Henry, I'm not sure what organization you're with, but your grant manager, either myself or Dan can also follow up with you. Oh, with CAPS. Okay, awesome. I'll follow up with you guys after this session. And then let's see, what happens if the GM sends us an email and we are out for the holiday break? So very likely we are going to be starting this like actual checking of the process after December 8th. So we'll be going through that. We're going to be really mindful of your time away. If you know that your organization is going to be, like the whole organization will be closed for set dates, please just let that GM know so they can note to not expect communication from you during that time. I know some of you do officially close fully, so just let us know and we can kind of work with you on that timeline. Okay, and then it looks like there's another question about if they already have a certification when they come in. I had mentioned that earlier, so I'm just going to follow up with that and offline, just because I want to hand it over to Steve to make sure he has enough time to talk about the funding component of closeout. So thank you guys so much. These were great questions. I really appreciate your engagement. And Steve, I will hand it off to you.
Great, thank you, Christine. Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Scott, one of your grant managers. Let's talk about the closeout fundings. In general, the amount of funds that will be available for your closeout activities will equal 10% of the grant's awarded amount. In those instances when a grantee received an advancement in funds, their closeout available funds funding amount will be adjusted accordingly. The closeout allotments are not determined using a per participant calculation. They're based on a grantee's completion of the required closeout reports and finalizing the data entered into the IWRS system. To receive the full closeout available amount, the data entered into the IWRS must be up to date, accurate, and complete. What happens next? Well, as we already discussed, in mid-January 2024, your grant managers will finalize your closeout reports and send your approved closeout funding amount to the Office of Grant Management, OGM. The approved closed out funding amount will be issued as a part of your overall reimbursement allotment. You are required to submit the appropriate documentation to support your closeout activities to OGM. Once the Office of the Comptroller receives OGM's approval, they will disperse the funds. Are there any questions? All right, if there's no questions,
I have none in the chat, Steve.
okay, if there's no questions to me, I'll pass it back to Christine.
Okay, great. Well, we actually ended about 8 minutes early. That was the end of our presentation, but if there are any questions, we will stay on here for the next couple of minutes. So please feel free to ask us questions in the chat or unmute and ask questions. But if you do not have any questions, you can feel free to drop off.
Christine, if you could, I just
Sure.
wanted to mention
Yeah.
something before we close. Just going through the process of closeout does not mean that you get to earn the closeout money. You need to successfully do the closeout. We will issue a rating for your closeout, and you need to be able to meet a certain threshold in order for us to release the money. Just going through it and you only do 20% or 30% does not mean that you will receive the closeout money. And I just want to clarify that.
All right. Any questions? Like I said, we'll hang here for a little bit.
I'm going to share an additional detail since this was a really asked about topic in terms of an individual joining a cohort or enrolling in a cohort, but they already had their OSHA 10 or their first aid CPR. Now OSHA 10, I believe doesn't expire, but first aid CPR does. And so that certification would need to be valid for at least 1 year after your cohort's graduation date. It certainly wouldn't be very effective if it expired a month after your cohort graduation, because then they're trying to enroll in a registered apprenticeship program and they no longer are first aid CPR certified. So that's an important item to keep in mind as well. And again, the process is fairly simple. They need to provide you with their certification. You would scan and upload that into their IWRS profile. You would then enter their under the first aid CPR training module. You would enter it as 0 required hours. You would change the status to evaluated not required. The person would not be allowed to receive stipends for the hours that the rest of the class attends that training module, and that would then allow them to complete the program overall without completing that individual training module. I also am going to share a question that was asked to me directly in the chat. It was a very good question. So they were asking about the overlap of compliance and active tracking. Compliance and closeout, and specifically about active tracking. And so essentially, during compliance on a monthly basis, we utilize a lot of the same techniques or requirements that closeout requires. And so, for example, when we provide an enrollment verification on a monthly compliance, we are evaluating anyone in an enrolled status for the items that will ultimately be required during closeout. So if a person has received enrollment verification, then we know that that participant successfully has the application in IWRS, has the interview sheets uploaded, so we don't have to go back and review those during closeout. Active tracking, that 90 days after program completion, is not something that we evaluate during compliance. So that is something that is looked at exclusively during closeout. So while there is some overlap with compliance, not everything that is part of closeout is part of compliance.
Chantrell with Teens Against Killing Everywhere. So we had quite a few students that missed the CPR class that was provided, and they never made it up. We've contacted the students, whether it was text, phone call. Some of the students physically came, and we were actually able to talk to them and ask for CPR license, and they don't have them. So in that case, for those particular students who are still missing their CPR license, will we just still make a case note for those students as well?
So yeah, so for those individuals, what you're going to do is you're going to mark them as incomplete, and that service will be marked as unsuccessful completion. Now, those students, it's important to keep in mind that if they do, let's say they come back during your next cohort and they finish their first aid CPR, you can always submit them as basically a carryover credit for next year. So even if they didn't complete this year, if they come back next year and you're a renewed grantee, you are able to reclaim that outcome metric and those funds into the next year because of your kind of grant agreement extension. So for right now, they'd be incomplete, but it doesn't mean they're incomplete forever.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, last call for questions before we sign off. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining today. Of course, please reach out to myself or Dan, whoever your assigned grant manager is, if you have any questions about this. We will be getting the checklist and that spreadsheet out to you today, so you can start to kind of schedule into your workload kind of how to get everything checked. But again, please let us know if you have any questions. We are available to help. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.